Hi everybody, welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Well, it has been a couple of weeks since I have been with you in the kitchen. It seems great to be back with you in the kitchen. I had to take a little bit of a break because I was just in here so much during the month of August during the Every Bit Counts Preserving Challenge. But I'm feeling inspired now because fall is really here. And so now I'm craving everything fall. I'm craving pumpkin pie, pumpkin coffee, pumpkin lattes, everything pumpkin. And it just so happens that we recently harvested all the rest of the pumpkins that we grew in our garden, and now they are ready to start cooking with. Now, this variety in front of me is the variety that we grew for cooking and baking pies and that kind of thing. There's generally two types of pumpkins that are grown. One is for like decoration and cutting into jack-o'-lanterns. And while those are technically edible, they generally are not very tasty. They're not very sweet. And then there's another kind of category of pumpkins that are generally considered pie pumpkins, or pumpkins that are just really good for eating. This variety here is called Long Island cheese pumpkin because they kind of look like a wheel of cheese. And from what I understand, they are a fantastic eating or a pie pumpkin. These seeds were from migardener.com, and the description said that really before you could buy canned pumpkin at the grocery store, this variety was a very, very popular variety to grow for your cooking needs and your pies. And generally, these are grown and are a good storage pumpkin and will store for about 90 to 120 days in a root cellar or a cool basement or something like that. And that is a really wonderful advantage of pumpkins like this, storage pumpkins, butternut squash, is that you can grow them and keep them for a while in storage and not have to worry about them going bad. So today I'm very excited because we're going to be doing some really fun things with these pumpkins here. We're going to be, first of all, I'm going to cut these open so we can see how beautiful they are and pull out the seeds so we can save them for growing next year and for sharing with friends and family and people from church. But we're also going to roast these in the oven so that we can turn the pulp inside into pumpkin puree that can then be used in our pies and casseroles, all of those wonderful things that we just look forward to in the fall. We're going to preserve a lot of this pulp by freezing, but we're also going to make a pumpkin casserole, which is very similar to sweet potato casserole. It's the kind that has like the nuts and stuff on the top. I've come up with a recipe that is very tasty, but is also keto friendly. As you know, Kevin and I are doing this high fat lifestyle of keto eating. And so this recipe, although it will feel like it's something we shouldn't be eating, it is going to be keto friendly. While we make that pumpkin casserole, we're also going to make homemade pumpkin pie spice, so that if you have all the ingredients in your house to make pumpkin pie spice, why go ahead and buy another spice? You can just combine what you have at home and use that. So we're going to take a little bit of time to also make homemade pumpkin pie spice. So you guys, let's get going. We're going to cut one of these in half. Now, I have maybe 12 or 14 of these pumpkins. They're not all this size. Most of the other ones are this size or maybe a little bit smaller. I have quite a few of these. But today we're only going to be roasting one of these and doing all of the fun things that we have planned. So let's get ready to cut this open, harvest the seeds, and then get it into the oven. Okay, we are going to be starting with this pumpkin here. We're going to cut this in half. Now I already popped off the stem of this pumpkin, which will make it a little bit easier to navigate, I guess. So I'm going to put this on a cutting board to protect the counter, and we're going to hopefully be able to cut this in half. Now I'm hoping that it isn't too hard for me to cut, but we're just going to work right through it, do the best that we can here. I am no expert at cutting pumpkins in half. So no judgment, please. There, almost. There we go. Cut in half just like that. Now you can see there is a beautiful layer of flesh in here. Lots of seeds, quite a bit of pulp inside of there. So we're gonna scrape out all of that pulp into a big bowl. We'll set that aside and work through those seeds a little bit later, but I do want to get these into the oven because it'll take quite a while for these to cook and soften. Okay, you can see that I have put these two halves of the pumpkin just straight down on a cookie sheet or a baking sheet. I did grease this pan so that it won't stick to it, and we're gonna put this in the oven. I have preheated the oven to 350 degrees, and I'm just gonna put it right in the oven just like this. So I'm gonna stick this in the oven, 350 degrees like I said. We're gonna cook this for, it's gonna take at least an hour. It may take longer because this is quite a big pumpkin, but when everything is soft and you can put a fork through the flesh and everything is soft, then we'll bring it back out and move on to the next step. Well, it's been about an hour and 10 minutes, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, and the pumpkin is finished. It's nice and soft. We're gonna pull it out really carefully because it has released some of its juices onto the pan and I don't want to spill it everywhere. So hopefully I'll be able to get it out of the oven without doing that. You can see the color of the pumpkin skins are much darker than before, and you can tell it's done because you can put a knife all the way through there very easily. It's nice and soft. So I'm gonna let this sit here and cool just for a little bit. In the meantime, I'm going to separate the seeds away from the pulp that we scraped out of these pumpkins. And then we will take the flesh out of these pumpkins and turn it into puree. So here is all the pulp and the seeds that were inside of that pumpkin, and next to it I have a bowl of clean, cool water. And so I'm just gonna go through this pulp and pick out as many of the seeds as I can, and then we're just gonna let them sit in this cool water until I'm all done, and then we'll just kind of rinse them around and try to save these for next year's growing season. Okay, that's enough seeds. I could probably pick through every single one of them, but I did get quite a few seeds out of this pumpkin. So I'm really just gonna swish around these seeds in this cool water. I'm really just trying to wash off some of the leftover residue that's on there. And really, collecting pumpkin seeds or winter squash seeds it's really just this easy. Just rinse them off. And then you'll want to dry them, with a paper towel, separate them, and then generally I put them on a paper plate, and then when they're completely dry, I'll store them for the next year, either in an envelope or in a little baggie or something like that. Okie dokie, the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to take the skin off of the pumpkin flesh that's inside of there. Now, the main difference between using homegrown or fresh pumpkin to make pumpkin puree rather than buying it in the cans from the store is that the pumpkin flesh itself can be a lot waterier than what you're expecting from the can at the grocery store. So we're going to try to take care of some of that wateriness, the water, now before we blend all of the flesh up. As I separate the flesh from the skin, as I'm going to put the flesh into a strainer inside a bowl so that hopefully more of the moisture will separate from the pulp or from the flesh of the pumpkin, drop into the bowl, and then I'll have kind of a thicker puree when I blend it all up. So as you can see, I'm just starting to peel away the pumpkin skin, and I'm gonna do that for this whole side. Now this part of the pumpkin flesh is already it's ready to go in there. So I'm just going to pick it up piece by piece and put it into this strainer so that any more of the extra or excess moisture can start dripping out of it. Okay, that is half of the pumpkin. I kind of assumed that the one half of the pumpkin would fill up this strainer, so I did bring out 2 bowls and 2 strainers. And so I'll be able to do the same exact thing for this other side. So I'm going to let these drip for a little while, for maybe 30 minutes or so, and then I'll come and check on them, see if they're still dripping. And if they're not, then we'll go ahead and puree them. Otherwise, if they're still a little drippy, then I'll just let them go for a little bit longer. I think that these have dripped enough to get started. Now I am going to be blending these up into puree in a food processor. And you know, it looks like I probably got almost a cup of juice to drip out of here, so I think that we will be in pretty good shape. I'm just going to scoop this into the food processor. I might have to do this a couple of times in order to fit it all in and turn this into some really nice puree. Then that we can use to make our pumpkin casserole later on in the video, and also to package up for the freezer. Now I'm going to be preserving a lot of this in the freezer in 2-cup containers, freezer containers. And then if I end up having enough for the year, then I will start freeze drying the rest of it for future years for long-term storage. But between our family, our immediate family, the 3 of us now, and our oldest daughter, Grace, who's newly married, and Kevin's parents, I think that I'll be able to supply our 3 little families with quite a bit of pumpkin puree for the year. And that's really exciting, and I'm really excited to share with them. So, okay, I have enough in here for now. I'm going to blend this up into the puree and see how it turns out. I'm going to start packaging up some of this puree into 2-cup freezer containers. Now, the puree that you buy from the grocery store is generally cans that are 15 ounces, which is just under 2 cups. And a pint is also 2 cups. So these 2-cup containers, pint containers, will do really well in the freezer. That's what they're actually for. They're freezer containers. I buy this size, also a 1-cup size and a quart size on Amazon. They're very affordable, reusable, no BPA. You can use them in the freezer, refrigerator, whatever. They've been very handy. But in the past, I've also used quart-size freezer bags for things like this, and I freeze them flat, and that has worked really well also. So I'm not going to fill this quite up to the top to make sure that there is room for them to expand in the freezing process. And this is actually what I'm going to do with the rest of this pumpkin. I'm going to puree it up and put it in freezer containers, but I will be saving out 2 cups of pumpkin puree for the recipe that we're going to make together in just a little bit. Well, that one pumpkin gave us about 8 cups of pumpkin puree. 2 of the cups we're going to be using today. The other 6 cups, or 3 pints, these containers will go into the freezer for meals for the future. And that is exciting. So I'm going to put these away in the freezer, and then we can move on to the recipe. Okay, this is the most fun part out of all of this pumpkin business. Actually making the first pumpkin recipe of the season. I'm so excited, and it's also keto friendly, which I'm also excited about. We're gonna start off making the pumpkin filling and then move on to the topping before we put that in the oven. I already have the oven preheated. One thing that we're going to need in the pumpkin filling is pumpkin pie spice. And I told you earlier that we're gonna make pumpkin pie spice just from the normal ingredients that we probably already have in our cupboards. and we're gonna do that first. There are 4 ingredients that we're gonna be using to make the pumpkin pie spice. That is ground cinnamon, ground ginger, ground cloves, and ground nutmeg. Now, a lot of times I buy my spices and herbs and stuff in bulk. A couple of these that I'm going to be using for the pumpkin pie spice I have bought in bulk, and I buy most of my bulk products from Azure Standard. And as I go through, I'll probably call attention to what I buy from Azure. There are a couple things that I've bought from Amazon, but let's just get going on this. So we're going to start off by ground cinnamon, and I use Ceylon cinnamon. I like the flavor. I think it's a little bit more natural type of cinnamon, and we're going to be using 4 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. Next, we're going to be using ground ginger, and we are going to be adding 2 teaspoons of ground ginger, 1 teaspoon of ground cloves, and then 1/2 teaspoon of ground nutmeg. Just using my teaspoon, I'm just going to stir all of that up until they're well combined. And then I can label this little jar, put it in my spice cabinet, and then I have quite a bit of pumpkin pie spice just ready for the entire pumpkin season. Okay, we're gonna move on to the pumpkin filling of our pumpkin casserole. We're gonna start off with some of the pumpkin puree that we just made a little bit ago. 2 cups of that is gonna go into our mixing bowl. We're gonna add 1/2 cup of heavy cream or heavy whipping cream. We're gonna add 3 large eggs. And these are room temperature, and they are eggs from our chickens. Now there are 2 types of sweeteners that we're going to be using today. Both of them are keto-friendly, and both of them are from the company called Swerve. Now these are erythritol types of sweeteners. I'm going to be using a powdered sugar form of the erythritol sweetener called Swerve, and then I'm going to be using a brown sugar sweetener substitute, a brown sugar substitute. Now for the powdered sugar, we're going to be using 1/2 cup of the powdered sugar in our pumpkin mixture. And then the brown sugar, we will be adding 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Now, if you are not doing keto, you can use these same measurements with standard powdered sugar or confectioner sugar and standard brown sugar. So 1/4 cup of the brown sugar. We're going to add 1 tablespoon of the pumpkin pie spice that we just made. 1/4 teaspoon of salt. That will help bring out some of these flavors. 1/2 tablespoon of vanilla, and 2 teaspoons of unflavored gelatin. I am using 100% beef gelatin, and this is going to just kind of help as a binder. Now, if you don't have gelatin, or if you don't want to use gelatin, you can use coconut flour instead. Now that is all of the ingredients for our pumpkin filling. Now we just need to stir it up. Now, if you would rather use a hand mixer or a stand mixer, you can definitely do that, but I really don't mind just using a whisk and mixing this up by hand. We just want to make sure that everything is combined really well, but we don't want to overdo the mixing. The baking dish that we'll be using is just like a 9x9 baking dish, and I'm gonna pour the pumpkin filling just into that glass baking dish. Well, the last step before we can put this pumpkin casserole into the oven is the topping. The topping is nutty and buttery and sweet and wonderful, and I just cannot wait to try all of this together. It's just going to be wonderful. We're going to start off with 1 cup of pecans. Now I have pecan halves, and I do order them in bulk from Azure, like many other things. You can order them in baker's pieces, but we really don't use baker's pieces very often. We use a lot of pecan halves. We eat a lot of pecans just kind of as, you know, in a homemade trail mix. So it doesn't make sense for me to buy them all chopped up. So I'm just gonna give them a rough chop. These don't need to be in teeny tiny pieces, but if they're mostly not halves, that would be great. All right, since we have those all chopped up, now I'm just gonna transfer them into the mixing bowl that we will be using here. We'll be adding 1/3 of a cup of the brown sugar substitute again. This Swerve brand is really very nice. We will add 1/4 cup of almond flour. I also order this in bulk from Azure Standard. We're gonna add just a pinch of salt. This is Redmond's real salt. I order it 5 or 10 pounds at a time from Azure. And then we're gonna add in 4 tablespoons of softened butter. Now I'm gonna get this going with a fork, but ultimately I will probably finish off combining the butter and everything else with my fingers. You could also use a pastry cutter, but this bowl here isn't really very big, and so it would not be easy for me to get a pastry cutter in here. This is looking great. Let me just pull over the pumpkin filling in our baking pan, and then we're just gonna sprinkle this on top. Okay, we're all set here. My oven is preheated to 300 degrees, and we're gonna put this in the oven for 30 to 35 minutes. Okay, our pumpkin casserole is finished baking in the oven. Now, it took quite a bit longer than I had thought or I had expected, because this time when I cooked it, I read the internal temperature with a meat thermometer, and I wanted it at about 165 to 170 degrees so that it would set up nicely and not be runny in the middle. Now, I'm gonna let this cool on the stove top for at least a couple of hours. And dishes like this, our family really prefers cold. At the very warmest, completely like room temperature, not warm. So I'm actually gonna let this cool down, put this in the refrigerator actually overnight, and then tomorrow, Kevin and I will cut a piece and taste it on camera with you all. I'm very excited to share this with you. It's going to be amazing. Well, it's the next day, and this pumpkin casserole has been in the refrigerator overnight.
She's been making me stare at it all night.
And it's time now for us to give it a try. I'm gonna cut us each a slice.
Smells really good.
Yeah.
And she tells me that it's keto, so...
Well, it is keto friendly, but I do want to add that pumpkin isn't necessarily the least amount of carbs in the world. It's not horrible. In 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree, there's about 6 net carbs, which isn't terrible, but what it means is that you shouldn't just like gorge yourself in this entire pan. It would ruin your day.
Right. What we try to do on keto is 40 to 45 grams of carbs per day total from good sources.
Okay, this is kind of falling apart a little bit, but I'll put some on that plate. And put some on that plate. Now this really does look amazing, and even though it is considered a casserole, it's really more like a dessert, I would say. So we're gonna try it. The texture of the top is very crunchy. Looks amazing. Is it good?
Tastes almost just like pumpkin pie.
In addition to this, that would be still within the keto guidelines, would be some whipped cream that you make out of heavy whipping cream and just put a couple drops of stevia drops in there or something like that.
Right.
On top, it would be almost exactly like pumpkin pie.
Yeah, this is really good. To me, it's a perfect alternative to regular pumpkin pie.
That's awesome. So this might be something that we add to our Thanksgiving Day feast that would be compliant with our keto diet. You guys, if you are looking for something to make for Thanksgiving or just to enjoy all of this fall pumpkin craze that we all go through this time of year, I really recommend that you try this recipe. Now I'll have the instructions and the recipes for everything that we have made together today in the description section of this video, so make sure you check that out. Totally recommend it because it's very good.
It is. I can't wait to finish it up.
You guys, if you're enjoying videos like this, I sure would love for you to hit the subscribe button. And also remember, the best way that you can help us here on the Homestead is just to share our videos on your social media. Until next time, thank you so much for stopping by our homestead. Take care and God bless.
God bless.